I think we'll make a start now. I hope you can see and hear me, and more importantly, that you will be able to see and hear our poets. I'm Nick Everett, co-editor with Rory Waterman of New Walk Editions. Thanks so much for registering for this online launch of our 2 new pamphlets of poetry. John Gallas's Aotearoa, Angleland. I'll let him explain that title. And Belinda Rimmer's Holding On. Hope you can see those. Before we begin though, I just want quickly to say a special thank you to our subscribers. If any of you are out there, thanks for the incredibly valuable longer term support you've given and continue to give our venture. We really appreciate it. And thanks for your patience during the pandemic too. This pair of pamphlets, like the last pair, is appearing a bit later than originally planned. We'll be sending them out next week. Massive thanks also, of course, to both of our poets, Belinda and John, for choosing New Walk, for their patience as well, and for agreeing to read tonight. They'll be reading for about 20 minutes each, John first and then Belinda. We're not going to have a formal Q&A session, but please do feel free at any time during the reading to put responses, comments, and even questions in the chat, and the poets will get to them if they can. And as Rory's said, also, yes, just say where you are in the world. Now, if you'd like to buy either or both of the pamphlets, and of course we'd love it if you would, £5 for one or £9.95 for the pair, just click on the link, which Rory will put in the chat feature to our big cartel site, and follow instructions there, where you can also purchase previous pamphlets and new subscriptions. We don't have any funding from grant awarding bodies, so we rely on your support, and we really appreciate it. Thanks so much again for registering and tuning in to what will, I'm sure, be enjoyable and stimulating readings of these wonderful and wonderfully different new pamphlets. So here, I hope, is Rory to introduce John.
Seamlessly done from me. I couldn't find I couldn't get my mute button to work. Yes. So yeah, everything Nick said. The link is in the chat if anyone wants to follow that to order the pamphlets. So John Gallas is the author of 26 books, mostly with Carcanet. He's a fellow of the English Association, St Magnus Orkney Festival poet. What a wonderful cathedral that is. Saxonship Projects poet, a translator, a librettist, a tramper, which is his self-description, not my description of him, biker, and fox, he says. And I think that means he supports Leicester City FC because he's a glory hunter. I've liked John's poetry for a very long time, and I've even read with him once when we were both launching things at Five Leaves Bookshop in Nottingham about 4 years ago, I think it is. He read a poem about a blobfish, which was hilarious, and other things too, but that was hilarious. I then reviewed his Five Leaves pamphlet, Mad John's Walk, which is a sort of zany prose and verse travelogue about retracing the steps of John Clare, for P and Review about 18 months ago. And then he fell into our lap. He submitted the work that became his New Walk Editions pamphlet, Aotearoa, Angleland, 40 plus 40 Tankas. And in fact, he submitted something close to 1 million tankers, possibly 1 billion. And he said, take your pick, I love them all. I almost slipped into a parody of a New Zealand accent when I said that, didn't I? I apologise for that. John's from the South Island of New Zealand, which is, of course, known in Maori, and please mind my bad pronunciations, as Aotearoa. He's also from Leicestershire, England, or here, Angleland, perhaps a nod to our Anglo-Saxon linguistic roots, more than to the, well, as much as to the odd angled look he takes at the country. The tanka, of course, is a Japanese syllabic form in 5 lines and 31 syllables. It translates as little song. So there you have it. 80 examples of an anglicised version of a Japanese form about Aotearoa or New Zealand and England in the inimitable, witty, moving voice of one of our and New Zealand's finest poets. Suitably, John's pamphlet bears endorsements from two other superb New Zealand-born poets who have settled over here, Fleur Adcock and Bill Manhire, both also exceptionally good, of course. What a trinity they would make in covers, and someone should probably do an anthology. But anyway, this is some of what Fleur Adcock has to say. Quote, "Only the form is consistent. Other things vary. The language, for example, the settings, the mood, the personnel. His restless imagination and exuberant vocabulary bounce us through a variety of locations, moods, landscapes, and seasons." And here's some of what Bill Manhire has to say. Quote, "These are the poems Wordsworth would have written if he'd grown up in New Zealand, been a bit more mischievous, and got round England on a bicycle," but they hadn't really been invented yet. And now I'm going to get up on screen a file of John's poems. They're not the file from the pamphlet. It's a Word file for the ease of scrolling through this short form. And I'm going to pass to John so that he may speak for himself. So over to you, John, and the poems will be on screen in a few seconds' time, God willing.
Thank you very much, Rory. That's my whole introduction done. You've said everything I was going to say, which is excellent. So all I'd like to do first of all is just to say thank you very much to New Walk Editions, and also to Dave, Irene and Vaughan, who helped to make this little book of poems concerning what I would describe as my own happily divided heart between the two places of my life. I'm going to read 10 Angleland Tankas, and then an English end piece, and then 10 Aotearoa Tankas, and a New Zealand end piece, which sounds a lot, but a tanka is soon over. So I'll begin with Angleland. Number 1, Lowestoft Harbour. Lowestoft, midday. 2 lifeboats leave the harbour, burbling side by side. Far out, against the world's blue wallpaper, I watch them part. Number 6, Muldrove, Eastertide. I ride at Easter down Muldrove. The hawthorn bends and drifts to the high cow parsnip, whose snow again makes white winter of the road. Number 8, Cold Colville. I watch the frost spreading on the hedges. 3 a.m, a tallow-faced moon. On the whitening lawn, 2 owls hold each other in their wings. Number 11, the Markfield Stalker. I long for the thrush. The high trees behind my house are empty. Waterman stars. I go to the gate. Silence. I wash my whiskers. Number 18, Fiskerton Station, with apologies to Edward Thomas and Adelstrop. Yes, I remember Fiskerton, the name, because there was a small owl standing on the platform with a paper bag on its head. Number 23, Snow on Hunstanton Beach. I'm the first thing here since it snowed. Superstitious of perfection, I walk in the dunes and watch the white beach unroll beside me. Number 25, in Crowland graveyard. So endeth all pride. Dumb and dumber cut the stone on big Wadburn's grave. Moss slubbed it says, look on my corks, ye nighty, and respire. Number 26, Swans at Measham Canal. Tonight I wander by the noctilucent bank to see the black swans towering in their love rage, slinging flakes of silver light. Number 28, Jamie Vardy, with thanks to the Esperanto Society of Great Britain. Ho, Jamie Vardy, ni amasfin en tutte, dankon porcio, specife teo brillagolo contra Liverpool. And number 30, doing the runes in the old house at Holbeach, St. Mark's. So I'm going to die. No pain, it says here, just a dissociation by degrees, and then a pale poof. I'm looking forward to that. And now, just to finish, and very slightly from the Tanka, an end piece, a very English poem about 8 pheasants running across an old bumpy medieval field, which happened to me last month. The field being so up and downy that I couldn't see the pheasants' legs, and therefore they looked like they were sailing. The 8 Pheasants of Loddington. Between the long lane and the church, the light, late and winter low at 4 o'clock, slips and troughs around the billow mounds that pock the farm fields hereabouts. The crests lime bright, then darkling dimmest green in all the thistly hollows where the fat sheep chaw. I lean up on the stile and gate and wish the weathers well. I know them all. They nibble on, their rip work tearing softly at the twilight air. The sun sinks to its last declining bloom. 8 pheasants cross the hurdle bridge and start off through the field. In mannerly formation, 3, 2, 3, faces at the ruddy light, they sail the grass from end to end in puffed up wise, an argosy whose little legs I cannot see, their prows all flaunting forth, their golden hulls breasting wave by wave. I watch them go, 8 May-Day barges on a festive tide. 5 o'clock and 2 more miles to walk. The sheep lie down, the sun shows done. I top the hill and level with the church's tower. The leadings light and then are gone. I stride the dark trees home before the frost. So, kia ora for the second half, which is Aotearoa. With thank you very much to Mr. Vaughan Rapatahana for checking out my Maori, which I won't translate as it would take longer than the reading of any of these Tankas. Number 1, the rook. A Collingwood rook sits up a gum tree and gleams. I get my phone out. He hides in the leaves and squawks, "Nolly me tangerine, mate." going floundering. Once we tiptoed out in the warm midnight shallows, our tilly lamps high, through the ripple mottled sand. Flying saucers broke and fled. Number 5, yum. Sing on, Pukeko. Drag summer back by its ears. Make it the 10th of December again, when we had that violet pavlova. Number 7, the waterfall. Deep in the bush, my secret waterfall falls its single silver foot. And here I am a giant, my head in the totoras. Number 9, the Heafy track. Rain clatters on the heaving Nikau umbrellas. A leaden sea swarms at the shore. A track winds on far into the spindrift. Good. Number 12, up there. Pepekatua sits in his cold mountain stream. Shadows of spear grass fence on the windy ripples where splay-legged spiders ride. 13, cave. Hang on, mate. I think there's a wetter on my head. Pew-pew shade the pool. I lap water in the dark, nodding my huge antennae. Number 15, when I was little. Number 2, I had a tin bath set in the back room between the fireplace and the crimson curtain. There I splashed and set sail for the front door. Number 17, Little Whanganui. Once I fell asleep in Little Whanganui. The spring white baiters swung their nets like giant sails. My head lay in a pawa. Number 20, Datelines. Everything comes first to the good folk of Tonga. From where it proceeds, west, in a Mexican wave, to the world's less happy lands. And to finish, a poem called Indifference about the depths of the New Zealand bush. This happened on my last visit to New Zealand. I like to go to the old Aotearoa goldfields in the top or northwest corner of the South Island, which has a one-way road. You can't go anywhere from it. And once you start tramping to the goldfields, which takes about 3 hours, you know that if there's not another car parked at the side of the river where the track begins, you're on your own. And this is a bit about being on your own. Indifference at the old Aotearoa goldfields. Deep, deep in the bush lies Adam's flat and Adam's grave. Where Adams lies and I sat on the chopped beach rail for an hour or two and listened to nothing at all from him or it. Manuka, Kanuka, ferns turning in flaps of light, the sometime piff of a falling leaf, and the quiet, quiet man beneath, whose lone prospecting days, I guess, were passed in this, the silence of indifference. His stony tailings, still piled as city walls, were creeped over, likened with the scattered echoes he had made. When something light as an airy nudge lit on the post with a flickered slap and started shifting itself to sing. The Tutuwai's song is a tucket of pins and done in a moment's wag. Which it sang on my pack, then back, a bob on the rail, the same, then quick on the grave, then the rubbled pile. And I listened, blank as a creek-fluttered pebble, as Adam's daily digging must have done, though it was not for us that anything sang or whispered to itself or touched the sky. Then it flew away to some viewless need, and so I thought with the darkling time, should I go? And thumped on back through the long green dark and the long green track, a little spooked by nothing now, but a little loath to leave the strange, sweet, cold, dead peace of Adam's flat for the business of living. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, John. Great whistling. Pretty good poetry too. Thank you.
Lots of practice there. And a bit of research as well for the robin.
Yeah, it took some nerve to do that as well. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Belinda Rimmer, as it has been to work with her on her poignant and observant poems. Belinda has been employed in a number of areas, including as a psychiatric nurse, school counsellor and lecturer, but her creative passion and vocation in her earlier life was dance. And in fact, unusually, it was only when she was no longer able to practice dance seriously, I think I'm right in saying this, Belinda can correct me if I'm wrong, it was only when she was no longer able to practice dance that she found herself turning to poetry as a reader and writer. The mind boggles at the thought of some contemporary poets dancing, so that seems to me a pretty impressive feat. In 2007, she completed a PhD at Manchester Metropolitan University on women's voices in contemporary poetry, and came away from that, as she's reported, wanting to discover her own poetic voice. Since then, she's gained some success and recognition as a poet, winning the Indigo First Poetry Pamphlet Competition in 2018, having a poem joint runner-up in the Stanza Poetry Competition the following year, and another long-listed just last year in the National Poetry Competition. The poems in Holding On, various though they are in their specific subjects and approaches, cohere around a central theme of female experience, precise evocations of significant moments from the poet's life in different everyday settings: kitchen, classroom, nightclub, riverbank, hospital ward, are complemented by fulsome tributes to the lives and achievements of creative women who have inspired her, most notably perhaps the children's writer Eleanor Fargen, invoked in 2 poems, and the psychoanalyst Melanie Klein, eulogized in another. The pamphlet not only bears eloquent witness to the challenges of living as a woman and as a girl in an often hostile world, it also explores the processes of memory and imagination by which such challenges are endured and understood. Please welcome Belinda Rimmer.
Thank you. Thank you so much to New York Editions for taking such good care of me and my pamphlet. And I really enjoyed John's reading. I'm going to start with a poem. The things that inspire me are quite often memory and the things that last in my memory. But when I try to write a poem, it often becomes change. So it's not quite fact and not quite fiction. But being Swedish in Pontlotten is pretty close to the truth. And I've recently reconnected with the Maria in the poem after 40 years. And she remembered the event very clearly too. Being Swedish in Pontlotten for Maria Evans. Word goes around. Maria's friend is Swedish. Boys in stripy tops line up across the dance floor, curious to know if my life is all sex and cigarettes. They tie themselves in knots to get close to me. I make space between my lips to let out the nonsense of pretend Swedish. I tell them of forests, herds of moose, the way to smoke a herring. The boys wrap me in their heat, their beery breath, their rugby thighs. They hang on to my every word. Later, on the train home, when I ask for a single to Gloucester, please, there's a dead feeling on my tongue. The next poem I'm going to read is called Liaison. And sometimes in life, some unexpected eruptions of desire can take one by surprise. Liaison. We had agreed to meet by a river, beside 3 boulders. I was to bring a picnic and he a blanket. I had gone along the road signposted, unsuitable for motors as instructed, followed a rough track and stopped to watch a heron sulkily paddling in an old mill pond. I caught sight of him then through summer's rusty haze. He held a bunch of daisies. I raced back to my car, fell into the familiar clutter of children's books and empty crisp packets. Sometimes I return to the river, let ghosts drift by with their wounds of daisies. I think because my relationship with my own mother has been complex, and I'm also a mother to 2 boys, I return often to the theme of motherhood. And this poem is called Grief and Forgiveness. Barely a single memory of their camping trip, just the appearance of a deer and her fawn, and how there was nothing to do but make love. When he brought her a coffee and she opened her bag and vomited into the clutter of hairpins and dried up lipsticks, she knew at once. And it wasn't funny or pleasant, it was terrifying. Before she'd even finished telling him, he'd left. It was summer, scorching and bothersome with flies when the baby came. Each day she brushed her hair and went into town to be anywhere except where it mattered. And in the next poem, I always wanted as a child to go, as my brothers did, to the building site to work with my dad. But it was a very patriarchal family and girls just didn't do that. But it was on the beach that I got to dig and to build and to actually spend time with my dad. And this poem is based on a photograph that I have of me digging on the beach, on a curving beach. in memory of Benjamin Sayers, 1933 to 1999. My father's in a white vest, hair slicked back. I'm in a knitted bikini, digging in the sand. I unearth a shell. My father jokes, it's radioactive, bluer than the word blue, written in a blue pen. He holds it to his ear to hear a cathedral choir. I hear seabirds learning the language of waves. All day we feast on its blueness, make plans to hang it from the apple tree, the one we planted from a pip. But it ends up on a bathroom ledge until it bleaches to a grubby grey. No moment of loss, just a gradual fading, as if this were never our shell and we had never spoken so highly of blue. The next poem is another blue poem, and it was only in the process of editing and putting these poems together that I realised quite how infatuated I am with the colour. A child stands outside my kitchen window in a sudden burst of rain, as dye from her dress, bluer than cold skin or sky, starts running down her legs and collecting on the pavement. She dabs herself with a tissue to stem the flood, reaches down to feather the blue into wings. Her mother comes splashing up the road, all, "Where have you been?" and slaps and kisses. For days after, I can't stop thinking about the dress, its patches of pure white, purged of blue. And that's one of those poems where memory played tricks, and I didn't even realise that the scene had registered, and then it was quite a few years later that it came out in that poem. And the next two poems are based on my work as a psychiatric nurse and then as a school counsellor. And the two poems are set 30 years apart, and they really show the different approaches to treatment. When I first started nursing, it was 1979, and it was a big institutionalised hospital in Gloucester with locked wards and padded cells, and the treatment was very much medical model, and ECT was very common, and it was quite really amazing to go in as a 19-year-old and see these things. And then 30 years later, when I worked as a school counsellor, a lot of the treatment for young people with mental health problems was based in the community, and it was much more collaborative. So the first poem is called Bank Nurse. I hand her a glowing cocktail of antipsychotic, sleeping and vitamin tablets. "Fuck off," she says. She likes her voices. They tell her she looks pretty in yellow. A slammed door. She's halfway down the hospital corridor on her way to the wood. I've been told to let her go. A gust of fresh air, a dusting of sun, and she'll be back. But I find myself among the trees with the foraging blackbirds and bluebell shoots. And there she is, hanging from a branch like a bat. Dress over her head, scratches on her bark brown legs. Sensing me, she shimmers down the trunk. Together we walk back through the wood, and I hear her voices speak of love. And the next poem is called Are You Talking? And it was a school where a lot of the children's parents or the fathers were ex-army. I don't think that has any bearing on the poem, but it was quite a difficult school to work in. A lot of the fathers had post-traumatic stress, and they were quite vulnerable children, some of them. And it's called Are You Talking? Railway scratches on her arms. She traces the thickest to its terminus. Gloucester, she jokes. I search in my bag for Savlon. White cream settles like snail tracks in sunlight. The sessions transport her from school to a room with a ticking clock and a window onto the hill. Her hill. She could map it, she says, all the landmarks. I give her paper, pencil, crayons. She draws trees, a stream, a washpool, grazing fields, none of it to scale, but not the spot where her father beat her, stains now washed away. Near the quarry, she crayons an abandoned van, patches of rust, faint yellow paint, smashed glass, and birds perched in lines. I can imagine it, I say, under a half moon, she tells me, but a full moon is better. And after I finished my psychiatric nurse training, I worked in a therapeutic community for disturbed adolescents. And at the time, we hadn't even heard of self-harming. It was something that came much later. There was a lot of glue sniffing and drug taking and anorexia, but nobody was self-harming. And this seems to be a much more modern phenomenon. And in the way that emotional turmoil expresses itself in different ways, I find interesting. The next poem is called Circa 1979. I think lots of women can relate to the experiences of growing up and discovering sexuality. And part of this, and sometimes achieved in difficult ways, is knowing who can be trusted, and also in learning to trust yourself and your own instincts about what is and isn't permissible. Circa 1979. He'd picked you off the dance floor, except he hadn't walked you home. It was an alley, cleaner than some. You remember a cluster of leaves, autumn, and Kit Kat wrappers flickering red, silver. His arms encircled or pinned you to the wall. Rain dripped on your shoes. You didn't know how to say stop, or if you did, you didn't say it, or maybe you said it, but it didn't sound right. Maybe you didn't want it to stop in the clean alley with the glinting Kit Kat wrappers. You'd become separated from your shoes. You might have pushed him away, but you don't think so. It became noisy, your shoes on the other side of the alley. You might have been shouting something unreasonable, he might have said. Maybe you were paying attention to the rain, thinking about Grease, the musical, or how your dad always bought you a Kit Kat on his way home from work. And then the poem I'm going to finish with is called Turning Point. And I think it's really interesting as you watch your children grow, all the different directions they take, and some of them can take you by surprise. But I think for my younger son, I think the fact that he became a doctor, there were little clues, and when you look back, you can kind of see it really. And this is called Turning Point. My son and I are remembering his birthday party when a girl ran into our patio window. bashing her head enough to bleed. We're not laughing at the girl, but at the hats I'd made from old comics none of the children would wear. And then the girl running into the window reminds us of the homing pigeons that flew over our house every day. We'd stand to count them, arms outstretched, and listen for the swimming underwater sound of their wings. I was fascinated by their pull toward home, my son with the things you could make from birds' bones, and the place where the pigeons turned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Belinda. That was wonderful. It's lovely to have your pamphlet and John's pamphlet together. They're so very different, and both so very. Oh, sorry, I've done strange things with my screen. And both so very enjoyable in their different ways. And yeah, I never encountered your work before my introduction through New York, and I'm really glad I have now. I'm going to move on to reading some of the questions and comments from the chat. So if you have anything you particularly want to ask, either to John or to Belinda or to even myself or Nick, please do. I think we have one or two already. We have people here from New York City. That's the winner so far. Gloucester. Not bad from our perspective, quite close to Belinda. Leicester, that doesn't count, I'm afraid. Between Gloucester and Cheltenham, I thought that was a motorway. Brockworth, apparently. Someone from the University of Leicester, good for you. Mount Sorrel, very good. Tewkesbury, lovely town. I used to stop there on my way down to Bristol, just to look at the Abbey. Cheltenham. Gardenstown. Now, I know there's one of those near Aberdeen, but there might be others in other parts of the world. London, Bristol, Gloucestershire, South Wales. We have a question from Catherine Alderman, who says, this was at 7:23, so this was after John's reading. Thank you, John. I love these. I'm interested in John's use of the Japanese form and language blend. Perhaps they can bridge a gap between places and cultures. I think that means your blend of Maori, English, Esperanto. That's for the specialists, isn't it? I didn't understand a word of it, John, but no, I did because it was translated for me. And Liverpool was not a typo. Liverpool is
no, it's Esperanto for Liverpool. Funnily enough.
But yeah, so I'm interested in John's use of the Japanese form and language blend. Perhaps they can bridge a gap between places and cultures. But I'd love to know about John's choices.
Well, for me, this sort of mixing, melding, and being different is very straightforward. Being a person literally of no culture, you know, I'm a New Zealander who's not a Maori. Neither am I European, and I simply don't have one. And this fits very handily with a country which, you know, for a white man is barely 150 years old. And then when you come to Europe, you're sort of slapped in the face with all this incredible history and beautiful buildings and all this stuff. And it's so wonderful to be able to have both. And it does encourage the sort of bridge making because of the personal experience. And so for me, that combination is perfectly natural, and also explains why I zap backwards and forwards on an airplane 36 times in the last 37 years to make sure that both halves of my heart are still operating.
Was that once a year until COVID ruined your plans, John?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you have another plan scheduled? Another visit?
Yeah, I'm stacked up now. I'm owed 2.
Very good. Very good.
So I've got to live a bit longer.
Do you want to take me with you, please? Especially in the winter. I'd like to go in the winter. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Late autumn and winter is the best.
I'd really like to never see another winter again. Thank you, John. So lots of love for your poems. Belinda. And a question from Catherine Alderman. Again, hi Belinda, I find your work very visual and very moving concerning the human experience. Also, your use of language is very evocative. I'm interested to know how your PhD research might have informed your process.
Well, it's very strange, but when I started my PhD, I didn't really know anything about poetry, but I was researching women's voices in contemporary poetry, but I was looking at a different space for language, really, and something that is more fragmentary and more like gesture and language through the body. And I didn't even know what a stanza was. And then it just became more poetry focused as these things do. It sort of changed. And I think as I kind of went on, I just read so many female poets that I just wanted then to write my own. And I did do a little book of poetry to back up the theories I was exploring, but they weren't really anything that I was sending off or publishing. It's only been in the last 3 or 4 years that I've really started to write more seriously and submit things. So it has informed my writing because I read a lot, but it wasn't really a theoretical PhD that was exploring poetry per se. So I was looking at some poets like Sharon Olds and looking at sort of how personal experience could be used in poetry, but not really in a way of writing it myself.
And you started writing poetry only about 3 years ago, you say, Belinda?
Well, more poetry that I would submit. The poems that I wrote for my PhD they were much more fragmentary, and they were really designed to go along with dance, because I was at the time dancing and using text with dance. And I don't want to get too academic, but I was kind of looking at psychoanalysis quite a lot as well. A sort of almost genderless space for language that comes through the body. So I think it's taken me quite a while to come to poetry, but I can kind of see the progression and I can understand how it's happened. But when I first started my PhD, I remember my supervisors saying something about stanza and I didn't even know what that was. So it's taken a sort of wiggly way, but I've kind of come to it late. And then I think of myself very much as still emerging, even though I'm quite old. So that seems quite strange as well.
Do you have a collection in mind? And if so, are you branching in a different direction with your poems?
Not really at the moment. I don't really know. I write quite a lot of flash fiction, so I've kind of been focusing on that quite a bit. I sort of seem to go between the two. But I've got this sort of strange flash fiction collection, which I don't want to say it's autobiographical, but she's a psychiatric nurse and she has all these suspect relationships. And, you know, I think it's not autobiographical, but there's a lot of me in there. And then I don't know about a collection. I'm really lucky that I've got a really good poetry group that I belong to, that we sort of workshop poems. And, you know, sometimes I sort of see where all that comes and how it all collects together. But I'm not really in a hurry with a collection. I know I have a Jenny Farley that I work with quite a lot, and she says, oh, maybe a collection, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to take your time. I think a lot of poets wish they'd taken their time a bit more towards a full-length collection. I think I do. But it's a wonderful pamphlet. It's a wonderful pamphlet, it really is. David Gale says, John, who are your main influences for your tanka? You're on mute. You're muted. You're silenced. You can't be heard. We can see your mouth moving. There you
go. Is that? Yeah. Nobody really, but it might have come via the haiku. Of course, the haiku is a difficult matter because it verges on the edge of parody now, and people think that these exquisite little poems are best done if they're comical. I don't agree. If you take, for instance, probably Basho, who's the great Japanese exponent, any of his travel writing is peppered with the most beautiful, wonderful, scintillating, brilliant haiku. And of course, Kerouac as well wrote wonderful, wonderful haiku. And I think those two between them probably set me on the way. But there were two things. One was the sort of the comic element just seemed to just stop me a little bit. And the other thing was that I just wanted something a little bit longer. And the Tanka, of course, offers you 2 more 7-syllable lines at the end of a haiku, which means you can just say that a little bit more and have an enjambment and play about with a couple of images instead of one, which just makes the whole thing a little bit more full, I suppose. So no direct influences of the Tanka. There are lots of translations by, I've forgotten his name now. Is it Wally? W-H-A? I can't remember. Sort of early 20th century translator of almost everything Japanese and Chinese. And I do have a little book which contains quite a few Tankas, but it was just the idea really of having a form that was based on syllables, which is very liberating. I mean, you have Old English poetry, which depends on alliteration and half lines. And then suddenly, it becomes rhythm, blank verse, iambic pentameters and rhymes. And it's very nice to escape from that great tradition, as it's called. And sometimes it makes you write things that fit a Tanka. And sometimes you do things or think things or feel things that fit perfectly into a Tanka. So it works in both directions, really. So no direct literary influences, but a big influence on the fact that the form itself, I find very, very liberating and very demanding at the same time as not being at all demanding in all the other areas of poetical form.
Sorry,
and I like count as well.
John, can I just ask a quick follow-up to that?
Yes.
I'm curious, why is the syllabic count, given that it's not audible in a sort of metrical way, why is the syllabic count important rather than just thinking, well, I'll write some 5-line free verse poems?
Yeah, a lot of poets do that, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's important in the way that it becomes a discipline, and any discipline in poetry forces the poem to become something more and else than what you originally conceived it was going to be. I mean, I don't think any of my poems would be very good if I just sat there and wrote down what I thought. But the fact that you have to push them into something, cut them up, cut them off, resize them, unshape them, redo them, it makes them into something quite different. So it's not just me talking. I tend to be quite objective anyway. It's not just me talking. It's somehow the use of that sort of form is one that's just a discipline. I agree. It doesn't necessarily. I mean, there's not punctuation at the end of each line of a Tanka. So yes, it's not obvious at all, and it's not Japanese. So therefore, even the syllabic representation isn't actually real, I suppose, in a way that it originally was. But it is a discipline, and sometimes it's quite a tough one. Especially in Esperanto, it's very difficult to write a Tanka, but it just allows that little extra space for you to have more than one idea. Basho is the master of the one idea and the one picture and the one image. Sometimes it's nice to have a little more.
I think one of my favourite versions of a Basho haiku is I think it's Basho. It's a Busan, one of them. I think Basho, though, probably the most famous haiku of them all, is a translation version by, I think, Dom Sylvestre Huerdard. French is not my specialism, but and the poem, 3 lines: frog, pond, plop, which I quite enjoy. I thought you'd like that. Anne Drysdale says yes. Arthur Waley.
Arthur Waley. Thank you.
W-A-L-E-Y. And you were talking about humor and the haiku, and of course what comes to mind for me straight away is Wendy Cope's Strugnell haiku, which are very funny, but they're doleful. You know, they're playing on the gravity of the forms.
I think Roger McGough also published a book of parody haikus.
Yeah.
Which are very, very, very good indeed.
Yeah, there's no
you have to be even better to be able to do that.
Well,
take it to the next level where it's not a parody; it's a parody of what people think of the haiku is going to be. That's really the job of a master, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's no parodic element to yours, but there is quite a lot of wit, quite a lot of self-effacing moments of wit, I think, as well as everything else. I'm just going to go through a few other comments. Alison Brackenbury says, yes, very inspiring translations, a very good introduction. I remember a battered revelatory book of Whaley's translations from Chinese. Very glad to hear your connection with this, John. Thank you, Alison. And such good readings, she says. I look forward to reading the poems again. Very different, very satisfying readings. Thank you, John and Belinda, says Anne Drysdale. And so on. I'm not going to read them all out, but they're all there in the chat if you wish to scroll through. Someone's in South Devon. I am quite jealous of you as well, but I'd still rather go to New Zealand. Okay, so it just falls to me now to close the event if we have no more comments. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending this New Walk Editions launch event. We're very proud to have published these two pamphlets, and we hope you'll order them if you haven't already done so. And the link for ordering is in the chat. I've placed it in there a few times. So please do click there. And thank you very much for coming. And thank you, John, and thank you, Belinda. It's been a joy. I wish we could all go down the pub. We can't, or go get some food or something like that, something nice. We can't do that. But both of us, myself and Nick, we're very grateful, and we're very grateful to everyone for attending. Thank you very much.
Rory, just wait 1 minute, 1 second.
And I'll pass to Nick.
There's a question about the recording. Because someone in the chat, is it Catherine? Catherine saying her Wi-Fi has been rubbish. So will she get access? Could she get access to the recording?
Email me and I will do everything I can to help you with that. Yeah, I think that would be fine. If you email us at newwalkeditions at gmail.com. newwalkmagazine@gmail.com.
Yeah.
If you email that, newwalkmagazine@gmail.com, I'll see what I can do. We might be able to make this available online pretty soon as well, within the next few days, an edited version of it. But thank you very much, and
yeah, thanks everyone.
Yep, good night. Take care.